I'm going to be redrafting the 2013 NBA draft. For those of you who are not super familiar with that draft, that is the Anthony Bennett draft. That is what it has been known as because it's one of the worst drafts in history. Although, for those of you who have not completely memorized the 2013 draft class, it still did produce a few really good players, and obviously one generational one for those of you who know. But nonetheless, I'm going to be doing that redraft for you guys. So a couple of rules here before I begin that aspect of the video. Number one, this is obviously all opinion-based, right? Many different arguments can be made for players being taken above other players, below other players, what have you. Obviously, it's all opinion-based. You guys will probably all have different ways that you would redraft this NBA draft. And that's totally fine. So if you guys have anything that you want to say about the final product, please feel free to leave that in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. I'd love to hear you guys say, hey, listen, I think you're wrong. I think this player was better than this player because of this, this, and that. And you know what? I might just agree with you. Who knows? But the point is that it's opinion-based, right? So obviously these aren't going to be in the way that probably any of you would redraft this class. Number two, the vast majority of this draft class is going to obviously be based on hindsight, right? So how did a player's career turn out? So obviously, you know, the guy who's played the best in the class is going to go number one. The guy who's played second best in the class is going to go number two, so on and so forth. However, there are a few picks that are based on the potential of that player at the time. And obviously, you guys will see that. You guys will understand. And obviously, some of it's going to be, you know, hey, maybe if you're drafted into a different situation or, you know, just in a different parallel universe like we're doing here, maybe injuries aren't necessarily as big of a factor. So if a player would have been better or was better at their peak, but then injuries hampered them, they might go a little bit higher than, you know, maybe another player who, you know, maybe had a better career so far, but, you know, just doesn't have as high of a ceiling. There are some picks like that. You guys will see it, and I'll definitely try and explain as best I can when those picks come up, why I'm putting this player here, why I think this player is better than that player, whatever. So that's going to happen also. And there's going to be 30 picks. So I'm going to do the entire first round. I'm not going to redraft the second round because, quite frankly, I was making a stretch even to get the first round of guys that, quite frankly, even made any sort of NBA impact. And so when I got to pick 30, it was really, really slim pickings for anybody that even made a remotely positive impact in the NBA for even a season or two. So, yeah, I stopped at 30 picks, so I'm not redoing all 60 picks for this draft. It would just be pointless. So, 30 picks is where we're going to stop. And a couple more rules in terms of how the draft logistically will work. I am not doing any kind of trades. So, it is, you know, where a team picked is where they're going to pick in this one. Obviously, in the NBA draft, there's trades all the time. But in this parallel universe, there are no trades. And it's going to be exactly like the NBA draft took place in real life in terms of the pick selection. So, the LA Lakers do not have a pick. The Golden State Warriors do not have a pick. The Houston Rockets do not have a pick. There are obviously other teams that do not have a pick. But the teams that did not have a pick in this first round in the 2013 draft do not have a pick here. So like I said, Houston, LA, Golden State, other teams that may not have had a first-round pick, they are not going to have a first-round pick in here. And if you had 2 or even 3 first-round picks, you're going to get all 3 first-round picks. So, essentially, it's just going to be, you know, kind of the order of which, the ranking of which these players, I feel like they should have gone in real life, with obviously the benefit of almost 10 years of hindsight here. Also, you guys are probably noticing I'm a little bit brighter than usual. That's because I have to have Basketball Reference up. I'm sorry. I am not really a guy that likes to look up stats in the middle of my podcast. I like to be super prepared, but I'm just not going to memorize Shabazz Muhammad's 2015 season. I just can't do it. So I'm going to have some pointers here just so I can remember the specific numbers that I'm using. So I do apologize if that kind of is a little messy on the eyes, but it's what I have to do to kind of make this flow and make it work. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And like I said, if you guys agree, disagree, whatever, please put your thoughts in the comments below. And with that, let's get started. So the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2013 had the number 1 pick in the draft. And obviously, as I kind of spoiled it earlier, their original pick was Anthony Bennett. He was out of UNLV, and he did not work out, safe to say. He barely did anything in the NBA. He only shot about 39% from the field in his couple of years of playing. I think he's now playing overseas, so good for him. He's still playing, but it just really did not work out for anybody, especially Cleveland, obviously. So they are not going to be picking Anthony Bennett here at number 1. The guy who they are picking at number 1 here is going to be, obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo. I don't even think I really need to make an argument here. Giannis is not only the best player in this class, he very well may be the best player in the entire world. He's an absolute freak. There's a reason why the Greek Freak is his nickname. 6'11", 250 pounds, rock solid, can do everything on the court except really shoot consistently from 3, which is obviously his biggest weakness and the reason why he hasn't, taken the ultimate leap forward. But he's an NBA champion, he's an MVP, he's a defensive player of the year. There's absolutely no argument here. He is tip top of the class, no doubt about it. Giannis Antetokounmpo, number 1 overall. The Orlando Magic had the second pick in this draft, and I think they're probably very, very happy that they did not have the first pick, because they would have had to make a decision that the Cleveland Cavaliers ultimately had to make. Not saying that they would have taken Anthony Bennett, obviously, although they very well may have, but I personally think that the pick that they had, Victor Oladipo, was actually a really, really good one. Victor has had a great career. He's obviously still in the NBA today, but injuries have really, really hampered him. However, I am actually going to keep him here at number 2. And this is one of those picks that I said earlier is a guy that, he has a lot more, I think he has more potential than some of the other guys on this list, even though you can argue that some of these other guys had better careers and have had better careers so far. But Victor Oladipo in his prime, he was one of the top 10 players in the NBA for a year or two. I mean, he was absolutely lighting it up for the Indiana Pacers. Once he left Orlando, he really, really started to shine a little bit more. Obviously, he struggled a little bit in Oklahoma City, but then once he went to Indiana, obviously he blossomed into a legitimate number 1 threat on the court, and then obviously hampered just by knee injuries and leg injuries and all other sorts of injuries, and it has really slowed his career down, but he's still playing very well for the Heat. He's still carved out a nice role for himself. He's come back again from just freakish injuries that would really derail 90% of players' careers, and he has persevered. So I think keeping him at number 2 makes sense here. Again, he has a ton of potential, and I think when healthy, he is the second best player in this class, for sure. So that is my number 2 pick. Number 3 was the Washington Wizards. Their original pick was Otto Porter Jr., who, himself, he's had a pretty solid career. He hasn't really blossomed into a number 1 scoring threat or a number 1 defensive threat like you would expect a number 3 pick at a wing position to do. However, he definitely has done a pretty good job of staying relevant, doing his job, carving out a nice role for himself. But there's another guy that is in this draft that has really, really done well for himself. He's had a fantastic career. Pick number 3, I'm going Rudy Gobert. So the Washington Wizards, instead of getting Otto Porter, who ended up being, a guy that was pretty overpaid, and then now just kind of a bench player, you get one of the best defensive players in the history of basketball. A guy who's a multiple-time defensive player of the year, the absolute best interior defender in basketball, and now he is in Minnesota, pairing up with Karl Anthony Towns. They're going to try and win themselves a championship this year. So it certainly has been great watching Rudy Gobert. He certainly gets a lot of hate for his lack of playoff success and the fact that he's really not much of an offensive threat. Only about 10 points a game despite being an all-star center. It's a little bit rare, especially in today's game, to only be scoring 10 points a game and still be considered all-star level player. But he certainly has done that, and there's a reason for that. He's a beast on the defensive end. Very few guys are as good as him on the defensive end inside ever. So Rudy Gobert, number 3 pick. Easily you could argue that he could be the number 2 pick here. I certainly wouldn't be mad at that if you decided to want to put him at number 2 ahead of Victor Oladipo. Completely understand that. But for me and the way I kind of want to do it, I personally think Oladipo, especially since he already went to the Magic, I would keep him there and just slide Rudy Gobert up to 3. All right, pick number 4 goes to the Charlotte Hornets in this instance. So Charlotte has done not a great job of drafting over the years, and they took Cody Zeller here originally at number 4. Now, Cody Zeller has been a solid player for them. He's averaged, about 8.5 points, 6 rebounds. He's played a ton of minutes for them. He's been pretty reliable in terms of staying healthy, although he has struggled at times with injury in specific years. But he's been a solid big man for them. And quite frankly, you want a guy who can help define your locker room, and Cody Zeller has been doing that for Charlotte for quite some time, although this year he was unable to find a home team. So for that reason and for a few others, obviously, I am not going to have Charlotte retaking Cody Zeller here because I'm going to have them taking C.J. McCollum. C.J. McCollum, obviously the Robin to Damian Lillard's Batman for many years in Portland. He's a great scorer, 19 points per game for his career. Great shooter, pretty solid defender as well, but just hasn't really taken that big leap forward to be a number 1 guy like a lot of people thought that he could be. Hasn't really developed a big 3-point arsenal. Even still to this day, C.J. McCollum is only shooting 39% from 3, which is, good, but it's not incredible like you see in guys shooting 42, 45% from 3. 39%, pretty good, but not elite. So, and I think that's quite frankly the perfect way to sum up C.J. McCollum. Pretty good, but not elite. So I think number 4 is a good spot for him. And, pretty good, but not elite at number 4, that kind of shows you how, really, really not deep this draft is. Like I said, it's one of the worst drafts in terms of production that there has ever been in the history of basketball. So that just kind of is a nice way to show you guys that there. Number 5, Phoenix Suns. They ended up taking Alex Len at number 5. Now, listen, I love Alex Len as much as the next guy, but he just hasn't really been able to figure it out much. In terms of his career, he hasn't really put it all together. He's a solid offensive threat, and he can shoot it a little bit, which is good in today's NBA, but he just really hasn't been able to put it all together like a number 5 pick. Like people figured a number 5 pick would. He's still sticking around. He's still having a nice career for himself. I do believe he has moved on to Sacramento at this point. So for me, I think that, he's had a pretty solid career. But again, not worthy of a number 5 pick. So we're obviously going to go in a different direction here. At number 5, another center. If you're going to go center, you might as well get, one of the best ones in the class, Steven Adams. Steven Adams, originally in this class, he was taken pretty high up here. He was taken at 12 by Oklahoma City originally. So he's going to slide all the way up to the top 5. He's had a nice career. He's a real bruising big man. Just gets a ton of rebounds, a good interior defender, and historically one of the, if not the best screen setters in the NBA. Sets incredibly hard screens, really, really hard for guards and wings to get around him when he sets those screens. A big-bodied guy. And he's just ultra, ultra tough. He's one of those guys that you hate to play against, but when he's on your team, you absolutely love it. So a great pick for Phoenix at number 5 here, and I think it's definitely an upgrade over Alex Len long term. Maybe not necessarily offensively and completely, but certainly on the defensive end, he's going to help solidify that front court for Phoenix. And at pick number 6, New Orleans. And New Orleans is another franchise that really, really just has not drafted historically well unless they've been handed Anthony Davis or Zion Williamson. But obviously, they're in a pretty decent spot here, and they ended up taking a chance on a Kentucky center, Nerlens Noel. Now, Nerlens Noel, coming out of the draft, there was rumors that he would be picked number 1, and quite frankly, that's where I thought that he would go when I was at that time, when I was that age. I thought that Nerlens Noel was the best player in this draft. I really, really did. I thought he was an absolute beast on the offensive end, and if he could figure out just a little bit of offense, I thought he'd be a real dominant center in the NBA. Unfortunately, his defense translated, but his offense never really did. So Nerlens Noel ended up, he's still around. He's still playing. I do think he is a free agent right now, so you never really know how that's going to work out. He might end up being picked up at some point towards the end of the season or, after the trade deadline or whatever. But right now, I do think that he is a solid player, but definitely not worthy of the number 6 pick, even in a draft like this one. So at number 6, I'm going to go with another person who's really shown out in Orlando, Tim Hardaway Jr. Now, there's obviously some guys that you could put over Tim Hardaway at this point. Certainly, I can understand KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope at this spot. I thought about Otto Porter again at this spot. I even thought about Dennis Schroeder at this spot. If you're going to go in the way of guards or, wings. But for me, Tim Hardaway is just a little bit better than those guys. Again, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Tim Hardaway, I could certainly argue for both. Could certainly see why you'd want either one. But I think Tim Hardaway, with just his scoring and the fact that, he is just a guy that has really, really, kind of made a real name for himself in a place where not a lot of people really have in Orlando. He's been able to have a nice role there, a nice niche. And so I am just going to put him just a little bit ahead of KCP here. At ultimately what would be number 6. Sacramento at number 7. They actually went with Ben McLemore at number 7 in real life. Now, Ben McLemore, I thought he was going to be, one of those guys that was just going to end up being a really good offensive player, and he just never really developed. He just kind of stuck in one place, never got a whole lot better. He had a couple of, resurgent, games. I don't know if you guys remember that back in, 2019 with the Rockets. He actually played really well, and he got starter minutes, and he was putting up 12, 15 points a night for a couple of weeks, and then he just, dropped off the face of the earth once the Rockets got healthy again, and that was really it. So Ben McLemore didn't really pan out, so just another one of these guys in this draft, and you're going to find that a lot here, is that, a lot of guys, they got drafted high, and it just didn't work out. They never developed, they never got better, whatever it was. So Ben McLemore, not going to be the pick here. My new pick is going to be a guy I have already talked about at this point, and that is going to be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Obviously, a guy who played for the Lakers quite a bit over his career, and he's won a championship at this point. He's a guy who's a wily veteran again, can really score. He's a guy that can defend very well. And that's another reason why I could definitely see the argument of him being ahead of Tim Hardaway Jr. Hardaway's not nearly as good of a defender as KCP is, but I just think KCP is a guy that, for me, he has been just about the same guy for his entire career. Hasn't gotten any better, whereas Hardaway has gotten better as his career has gone on. So, for me, I put KCP a little bit behind Hardaway. And, again, KCP, champion, right? He's a solid role player. He knows exactly what he's good at, and he sticks to it. So KCP, definitely an upgrade for the Sacramento Kings here at number 7. Number 8, we have the Detroit Pistons. They actually took Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in real life. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, like I said, has carved out a nice role for himself. He's doing very, very well. And so definitely a good pick for Detroit at that point. But in this world, KCP is off the board. So who are you going to take? I am going to say they take the original number 3 pick in this draft, and that is, of course, Otto Porter Jr. Otto Porter Jr. is going to give you a lot of the same things that KCP has given you, but just, he hasn't really developed, and maybe, if they are very similar players, maybe it's because he was drafted higher than KCP, he had, he was paid more than KCP was, I don't really know what the reason is, but I just feel like in this reality, and quite frankly, just in real life, I think I'd rather have KCP than Otto Porter. Otto Porter was a solid, important role player on the Warriors last year, but other than that, he's been a role player everywhere he's gone, and for a number 3 pick, that's just not what you want. You don't want a guy at number 3 to be a role player. You want him to end up being either a number 3 option or he end up turning into an all-star or a number 2 option, number 1 option even if you get lucky enough. You don't want him to be a guy who's a 4th, 5th, or 6th option, and that's really what Otto Porter has been for most of his career. So I'm going to take him here at number 8. But again, he did have potential at the time, so I can understand Detroit still wanting to take him this high. So we're going to go with him at number 8. Pick number 9, Minnesota. Minnesota is another team, again, that's just had really a hard time drafting unless you're handed the number 1 pick, like they were with Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, right? So it's just one of those things where, Minnesota has had a hard time. They've drafted a lot of guys high up that they thought would really make a difference, and they haven't really made that big a difference. And another case in point here, Trey Burke is who they ended up taking at number 8 overall, or excuse me, number 9 overall. And Trey Burke, solid player, decent, but as a top 10 pick, just wasn't going to work out. He ended up not really panning out. He ended up not really being the player that Minnesota hoped him to be. And that's really it. And so here at number 9, we're obviously not going to go with Trey Burke. We are going to go with another guard in Dennis Schroeder. Obviously, Dennis Schroeder was drafted by the Thunder, and he ended up being the backup to Russell Westbrook for several years, and he was very, very good. He could put the ball in the bucket, and he obviously was a good playmaker as well. Fantastic driver, had a decent jump shot as well, but man, he could just score. And so, at this point, for Minnesota, you want a guy that can score. And obviously that's what they picked Trey Burke for, but he ended up not really panning out in that way. But Dennis Schroeder, you're looking for a guard that's going to score and help run your offense. Dennis Schroeder is, I think, the perfect pick for Minnesota at this point. Obviously, too late now. Many years too late for them in real life. But, and the reason why Dennis Schroeder is not higher on this list is because his career has really, really taken a nosedive. Now he's just struggling to even find a team, despite the fact that early in his career he was averaging over 20 points a night. And when he was on the Lakers, he was averaging 16 points a night, and that was only 2 years ago. And now he's barely even able to find a team. He's back with the Lakers now, but he's barely even able to get playing time at this point, which is just crazy. It's just crazy that, the career has just swung so far in that direction. But, again, I think it's a really solid pick, especially if you get peak Dennis Schroeder early in his career where he's putting up 20 points a night. Great pick for Minnesota here. Number 10, Portland. They originally drafted, as I mentioned earlier, C.J. McCollum, and it just didn't end up being what they wanted him to be. Now, he's a fantastic player, but I think that they were really, really hoping with him, Damian Lillard, Yusuf Nurkic, and the rest of the crew over there in Portland that it was going to be good enough to take them to a championship, and it just hasn't worked out that way. And now, New Orleans is thinking the exact same thing in terms of they're wanting C.J. McCollum to help be a scorer and a presence on the floor that can help lift the team to a championship. And time will tell whether that ends up being the case. But obviously in this reality, C.J. McCollum is completely off the board. So who do the Portland Trailblazers pick here? I am going to give them, at this point, Mason Plumlee. So Mason Plumlee is another just really solid guy that's had a really solid career. He was originally drafted much lower in this draft. He was drafted at 22, so certainly sliding all the way up to a top 10 pick, a lottery pick here. Good for Mason Plumlee. And you know what? I think that it really shows, and again, this is no offense to Mason Plumlee, but I think it really goes to show you how just a little bit sad it is, because if you tell me that Mason Plumlee is top 10 in anything in the NBA right now, I'd be surprised. So Mason Plumlee, solid player, but would I have ever guessed that he could be top 10 in a draft? That's a little bit sad, at least to me. Because Mason Plumlee, again, you look at his stats, and it's not like he'll, light you up. 8 points, 6.5 rebounds a night, doesn't really shoot threes, doesn't really play much defense. His value over a role player over his career is 12.9, which is pretty good, but in terms of a guy who's been playing for 10 years, that's not going to light you up. That's not going to be something that you're going to get super duper excited about. He's definitely above average, but he's not going to really excite you. He's not going to give you any kind of all-star level play. He's going to give you slightly, ever so slightly above average play. So the fact that he's in the top 10 here, that it frustrates me a little bit for this draft class. That just kind of goes to show you. But Mason Plumlee, solid pick here for Portland. He'll give you reliability. He's a guy who's, he's been on the floor a ton. I do believe in this draft class, he's played the most games, or, at least close to it. Looking through it, actually, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has played more games than him. But out of everybody else in this draft class, Mason Plumlee has played in the second most games out of everybody in this draft class. So he's a guy who's going to stay healthy. He's going to give you minutes. He's going to stay healthy. He's going to be reliable. You know what you're going to get from him. So solid pick here for Portland. Philadelphia at 11. They actually picked Michael Carter-Williams at number 11, obviously. And Michael Carter-Williams, little trivia here for you, won Rookie of the Year. He won Rookie of the Year in this class, and everybody thought that he was going to just usher in a new era of point guard. He's, 6'6", slender. He could shoot. He could drive. He could see over all the point guards that were going to guard him, so he was going to be able to get assists. And you know what? He may have ended up turning into that guy, but this poor guy just kept getting injured, and it just really, really stunted his development and his growth as an NBA player. And now he is no longer even in the league at this point. He left the league a couple of years ago, couldn't really find a team that wanted to give him a shot. And, the sad part is, he could have really been good in my mind. But you know what? Maybe considering the way the NBA has gone in terms of what teams are asking from their guards to really be pure shooters, that's not necessarily Michael Carter-Williams' game. He's more of a scorer. He's more of a driver. He's more of a, he could post you up maybe. He can get you on that mid-range. And that's just not really what the NBA is about anymore. So maybe he wouldn't have worked out anyway, but it's tough to say with all the injuries. And for that reason, I am actually going to, at this point, have the Philadelphia 76ers keep Michael Carter-Williams at number 11. Because I think that what they needed at the time was a point guard. They needed a guy to help run their offense. He was young. He was up and coming. And you know what? The guy won Rookie of the Year. So obviously at the time, it was a really, really good pick at number 11. So I'm actually going to keep him at number 11. Again, this is another one of those picks that you sit there and think, oh, well, is he really the 11th best player in this draft? Probably not overall, but the potential was there, and so I can understand the pick. So that's what I'm going to go with. Number 12, Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City, they originally took Steven Adams here. Obviously, Steven Adams no longer on the board. We talked about Steven Adams early on, so I'm not going to go into it again. But instead, I'm going to have them take Cody Zeller. Cody Zeller is a guy, obviously, I talked about earlier. He's been solid. He's a good shooter. Good offensive player, can give you boards. And if you need a center, you know what? You could do worse than Cody Zeller. You certainly can. But obviously not going to give you what Steven Adams gave you on the defensive end. So not the best pick in the world, but you know what? I'm sure if you went back in time and told the Thunder that Steven Adams wasn't available, so you had to go with Cody Zeller, it probably wouldn't be the absolute worst thing in the world for Oklahoma City there. Number 13, Dallas. So Dallas, they actually picked Kelly Olynyk and ended up in a trade with Boston, trading him over to Boston. But obviously in this case, we're not doing any trades. So in real life, they took Kelly Olynyk, and actually, I love that pick. Kelly Olynyk going to stay in Dallas here at number 13. And the reason is because, again, Kelly Olynyk has had a solid career. He's a great offensive, no, I wouldn't say great. He's a good, solid offensive player. And he's had some great moments. I think all of us Celtics fans remember the Kelly Olynyk game in Game 7 against the Wizards in the playoffs a few years ago. Where he dropped like 25 points in a Game 7 and we were all just like losing our minds. And you know what? He's had a good career. He's bounced around, still coming off the bench here in the NBA. And you know what? Good for him. I think that you could definitely do worse here at number 13 if you're Dallas. And in this world, maybe he doesn't get traded and he ends up carving a nice role out there in Dallas. Number 14, we're going to get into Utah. So Utah actually took a young man. This is going to be, obviously, in the NBA, it's going to be the last lottery pick is number 14. To round out the lottery, they took Shabazz Muhammad. Shabazz Muhammad, a guard out of UCLA. They thought that he'd really just be an unbelievable defender and then maybe develop on the offensive end, and he was neither. He wasn't a good defender. He wasn't a good offensive player. He just didn't pan out whatsoever, and he was out of the NBA in a very short time. He actually stopped playing in, I believe 2016, 2017. So, I mean, maybe not that quite that soon. Maybe like 2019-ish, maybe 2020. Only about 5 or 6 years in the NBA. So he didn't really pan out, obviously. He was actually one of the biggest busts, considering, the fact that, at least these guys in the top 15, 20 that we've already, gone over here, most of them other than Anthony Bennett have played, for the most part, all the way up to 2020, 2021. And if not, they're still playing. Whereas Shabazz Muhammad lasted about half that time. So, certainly didn't pan out. So, we're obviously not going to go with Shabazz Muhammad here at number 14. We are going to go with another center in Gorgui Dieng. So, Gorgui Dieng is, he had a nice, solid run with the Timberwolves. He actually played starter minutes for quite a while there for a couple of years, and he didn't do too badly when he did get those minutes. So, you know what? Again, another guy that you could do worse, but right now in the NBA, he's kind of a little bit lost. He is still around, but he's not getting a lot of minutes. He's certainly not going to get starter minutes at this point. So I definitely would put guys like Cody Zeller. I definitely even put Kelly Olynyk up there ahead of him. Because, again, Gorgui Dieng, he's not going to get you too much, but he's a solid big man, and so I'm going to give the Utah Jazz Gorgui Dieng here. And you know what? Maybe he gets some resemblance of replacement for Rudy Gobert, who obviously ended up playing for the Jazz. Pick number 15, the Milwaukee Bucks. Definitely the team that gets just screwed more than any team in this draft because they took Giannis at number 15, which breaks my heart as a Celtics fan in hindsight because we have pick 16 in this draft, and my goodness, how the NBA might be different had he lasted one more pick. But nonetheless, he doesn't obviously last to pick 16 here, and he doesn't even last to pick 15, doesn't even last to pick 2 because he's already gone at number 1. So they are not getting Giannis. And unfortunately, it's not going to get too much. It's not like I'm going to find some other diamond in the rough here for the Bucks because they are going to get Alex Len. Now listen, like I said before, Alex Len is a solid player. And you know what? I was a fan of him coming out of this draft, but he just hasn't developed a whole ton. And you could definitely do worse for a non-lottery pick than Alex Len. I've certainly seen plenty of guys that are drafted this late not even make starting lineups, not really do anything in the NBA. And at least Alex Len has done some solid stuff and has carved out a role for himself on several teams. So you know what? Not the worst pick in the world here for the Bucks, but again, I'm sure they'd rather have Giannis. But that's just a guess, though. Number 16, obviously I talked about Boston. Now, all of the guys that I have talked about having been drafted in real life up to this point have actually had some kind of role in the NBA at a certain point. And the Celtics drafted some guy, I'm not even going to lie to you, never even heard of him. His name is Lucas Nogueira. I have no idea where he's from. I have no idea what happened to him. I have no idea who he is. I'm guessing that he was a part of some trade because I feel like as a Celtics fan, I would have known had he played for the Celtics. But, I mean, I guess it doesn't really hurt to look here. Yeah, he never played for the Celtics. He ended up, playing for Toronto for a couple of years, never averaged more than 4 points a night, and just ended up, not really doing a whole lot outside of that. So, obviously, never really played for the Celtics, so, I've never heard of the guy. Sorry, Lucas. No offense, sir. I'm sure you're a nice guy, but I never heard of you, so you're not getting drafted here at 16 by the Celtics. The Celtics actually are going to take Nerlens Noel. Now, you know what? I'm going to admit something here. I think Nerlens Noel is probably better than Alex Len, and you know what? He might even be better than Kelly Olynyk or Cody Zeller. Maybe. But, you know what? He lasted until 16, so I'm going to jump on it here for the Celtics. Certainly I can make the argument that he should have gone at 15 to the Bucks, or 14 or 13. But you know what? for me, I think that the other picks just made a little bit more sense for the other teams at the time. I think Dallas definitely taking Kelly Olynyk makes sense considering how they used Kristaps Porzingis as a guy who could shoot on the outside, and that's exactly what Kelly Olynyk can do. Obviously, Utah probably wants a guy like Gorgui Dieng who's going to gobble up rebounds and play good defense, just like Gorgui Dieng does in real life. And then Alex Len, I can see where you'd want Nerlens Noel instead there, so I'll give you that. But for me, I like Alex Len just a little bit more, just because he translates to the current day of the NBA just a little bit better than Nerlens Noel does. And obviously, Alex Len still in the NBA, whereas Nerlens Noel has not found a team this year. So for me, there's just a little bit of the edge there. So that's why Nerlens Noel fell to 16, where I'm sure the Celtics would, be able to use him. Number 17. So the Atlanta Hawks actually get the privilege of having back-to-back first-round picks here at 17 and at 18. Now, in real life, they used these picks on Dennis Schroeder and Shane Larkin. Schroeder obviously had a solid career. None of it with Atlanta. And then Shane Larkin just didn't really do a whole ton in his career. Now, when he played, he made some impact sometimes, but he didn't really do much. So neither of these players really ended up making a difference for Atlanta. So hopefully we can change that here. With the first pick of 2 that the Hawks have here, at number 17, I am going to go with Reggie Bullock. So Reggie Bullock. Lost my place there for a second. Reggie Bullock is a guy that, he's had a pretty reasonably solid career. Ended up getting drafted at 25, in the original draft. And, he's still around. He's still kicking in the NBA. Believe he plays for Detroit at this point, but I want to check just to make sure. He plays for Dallas. Okay, so he plays for Dallas right now. So glad I checked that. Team that starts with a D. So, close enough. But either way, he's still sticking around, so he's had a solid career. He's a guy that, his stats can't really necessarily be overlooked. He's averaged just over 7 points a game over his career in just under 23 minutes. So, that's not really horrible to average. And at one point in his career, he was averaging, 12 points a night, 11 points a night for several seasons in the NBA. So, you know what? Good for Reggie Bullock. I figured I'd give him the respect that he has earned at number 17 here for Atlanta. And with the number 18th pick, we're just going to jump right into it since obviously I've already kind of talked about it. I'm actually going to give the Atlanta Hawks Ben McLemore. Now, the reason why I give them Ben McLemore is because I think he translates to the way the Hawks play a lot better than he plays or that he translates with a lot of the other teams he's played for. And you know what? As opposed to being a guy that flopped because he was taken at 7, you know what? If you take him at 18, maybe he ends up just being a solid shooter off the bench for you instead of a guy that's supposed to put an entire city on his shoulders. So maybe his career doesn't look quite as bad if he's picked at number 18. So Ben McLemore here at number 18. Pick number 19 goes to Cleveland. Obviously, they had the distinct privilege of drafting Anthony Bennett at number 1. And obviously in this draft, they had the distinct privilege of drafting Giannis at number 1. So they already have, a generational player that he'll end up turning into. And now they get another pick here at number 19. And I am actually going to give them Trey Burke. And the reason I'm going to give them Trey Burke is, you know what? Giannis is a guy that can really run the offense. Trey Burke was a good shooter during his time. Trey Burke ended up retiring with a 35% three-point percentage, which obviously isn't great, but he's still a guy that can knock it down if given the opportunity. So you know what? Have Trey Burke just kind of stand on the outside, let Giannis run that offense, and you know what? There you go. I think it's a perfect pairing. Now, obviously, there's some other guys that you might want to take ahead of him. I can certainly see Raul Neto, who will go a little bit later in this video instead. But for me, Trey Burke, I think, fits what the Cleveland Cavaliers would do at this point, especially with who they have at number 1 in this world, which would be Giannis. At number 20, the Chicago Bulls. They took Tony Snell with their number 20 pick in this draft. And Tony Snell is a guy never really turned out to be what a lot of people thought he could be. They thought he could be, a guy that was, a real hybrid wing where he was a, a power forward, but a center, but a small forward. He can kind of do all three, and he just ended up not really being any of those. He just ended up not really panning out too much, but could certainly understand the Bulls taking him at this spot. And you know what? I'm not even against keeping him here, but instead of keeping him, I actually decided to give them Mike Muscala. Now, why Mike Muscala? He's just been a bench guy his whole career. He's never really developed into a whole lot. He's never really done a whole lot. But you know what? Think about it this way. Mike Muscala has been in the NBA for almost 10 years. He plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder. The team that trades everybody that's not 25 years old away. He's still stuck around on the Oklahoma City Thunder. There's got to be something there. And it's not even necessarily talent-wise, but just in terms of his leadership ability or in terms of his attitude, his locker room presence, there's got to be something there that's keeping him around in Oklahoma City that they love. Because otherwise, he'd have been gone a long time ago. Al Horford is still one of the best defensive big men in the NBA, and the Thunder were just like, yeah, we're just never going to play you. We just don't even want you here. But Mike Muscala, still there and still getting minutes. So you know what? There's got to be something there to Mike Muscala. So I'm going to give him to the Bulls here at 20. Utah, back up again for the second time here at number 21. They took Gorgui Dieng at number 21 here. Now, I actually had them taking him at 14 in this draft. So they get Gorgui Dieng either way. They just have to obviously use another pick that they had before, and I'm sure that they would rather have Gorgui Dieng than Shabazz Muhammad at this point. So instead of Gorgui Dieng, because obviously he is already off the board, I am going to give them Solomon Hill at number 21. Solomon Hill, a guy, again, he actually was a pretty, a guy that got picked right around this time, again, at number 23 in this draft, just moving up a couple of slots. He had a solid career. Nothing crazy special, only averaged about 5 points a night, but a guy that stayed healthy, a guy that played solid defense, and a guy that really carved out a role for himself on several teams. Most notably probably the Indiana Pacers, back when they were, taking it to LeBron every year. Although they always ended up coming up a little bit short. But you know what? That was still a lot of fun to watch as a fan. So Solomon Hill, I will give to the Utah Jazz here at number 21. Number 22 is the Brooklyn Nets. Now, Brooklyn took Mason Plumlee here at number 22. Mason Plumlee, obviously, long gone, went in the top 10 in this mock draft. So obviously they're not going to get Mason Plumlee here. So instead, I am going to give them Tony Snell, a guy, again, you know what, take a chance on a guy who might develop into some kind of potential. And again, you know what, he went around this time anyway. So, he ended up having a reasonably solid career. He stuck around for 9 years despite the fact that he was pretty ineffective. He could shoot the ball okay. But, in terms of just, his efficiency, it just wasn't there. He ended up finishing, if he is obviously finished in the NBA and he doesn't end up finding a team, he ends up now being a guy that ends up being a below average player. But you know what? At 22, you could definitely do worse, especially in this draft. Number 23, Indiana Pacers. They obviously took Solomon Hill at number 23 in real life, but at this point, he is somebody that is not available at this point. So for me, I'm kind of looking at, who is a guy that I think might be able to fit Indiana. Solomon Hill is a guy that fit Indiana pretty well, but I don't think he is the best fit for them. I think that a guy who is an even better fit for them at this point is going to be Raul Neto. Raul Neto is a guy that, you know what? He's a solid defender. He's a good perimeter guy. He can shoot it. He can pass it. He can really defend. And you know what? He hasn't had the best career, but for a guy who was drafted, 47th overall in the draft, he had an 8-year career. Good for him at this point. And you know what? At this point, we're really reaching, right? I think you guys could probably notice that. These guys aren't going to be guys that are going to be all-stars, starters. They may not even be guys that give you any kind of minutes off the bench that are going to be consistent. But you know what? that's just how bad the draft was, guys. I mean, I'm telling you, by the time we get to 30, we're really, really reaching. We're really reaching. So Raul Neto had a solid career. So at this point in the draft, that's what it really takes. All it really takes to kind of, be drafted. Number 24. Number 24 in this draft belongs to the New York Knicks. Now, they took Tim Hardaway Jr. at this pick. Well gone. He went in the top 6. He went at number 6 to New Orleans in this mock draft. So where do the Knicks go with this pick? I'm going to give them Andre Roberson. Those of you who remember Andre Roberson know that he could shoot a basketball about as well as a blindfolded hippopotamus. So he couldn't shoot at all. I think he finished his career with a three-point percentage in like the teens. Now I'm going to look that up here. Actually, it wasn't in the teens. It was 25% from three, which for a shooting guard doesn't exactly showcase how well you are shooting it. But those of you who remember Andre Roberson know he was one of the, if not the very best perimeter defenders in the NBA for a time. Him, Avery Bradley, those were your two shooting guards that could really defend well. So Andre Roberson, fantastic defender. I think he'd really do well in New York at this time. So going to give him to the Knicks at 24. 25 belongs to the LA Clippers. Obviously, I said the Lakers do not have a first-round pick, but the Clippers do get a late first-round pick here at number 25. They went with Reggie Bullock at number 25. And Reggie Bullock, again, had a solid career, but he has gone already. So instead, I'm going to give them James Ennis the second here at number 25. James Ennis, again, another guy who was drafted in the second round and ended up having a pretty good career. At number 50, he spent 8 years in the NBA, averaged just under 7 points a night for 8 years. You know what? You could definitely do worse, especially at number 25. The Clippers would get a guy that can come off the bench, score a little bit, defend a little bit. Not too shabby for the Clippers. Number 26, again, another pick by Minnesota, who obviously picked at number 9. They already picked Dennis Schroeder. So what does Minnesota do? They took Andre Roberson at this spot in real life, but obviously he is gone now. So what are you going to do if you are Minnesota? You're going to go, if you want to go with a similar position, I can certainly do that. So we are going to go with Alan Crabb, another guy who was taken in the second round, although this time the first pick of the second round. Alan Crabb, again, another guy that for his time was pretty good. He actually averaged almost 10 points a night for his career, although his career ended up obviously being a little bit shorter than he probably would have liked. Only 7 years in the NBA until he was out of a job. 39% from three for his career. Not too shabby. Again, for a guy that's going to go at number 26 here, you could certainly do worse. Denver at number 27. They are another team that ended up really getting shafted here because they took Rudy Gobert, but they ended up obviously getting traded to the Jazz. But even if, if they had taken him in real life, or they did take him in real life, but if they kept him, I should say, in real life, then certainly they would have had a fantastic center, although Nikola Jokic is a guy that, exists, and maybe that you'd rather have him, and certainly I would. Two-time MVP, obviously. So Rudy Gobert not here in real life, so unfortunately, and again, at this point, guys, we're grabbing at straws. We're really, really down to the nitty-gritty here. So at number 27, I am going to, unfortunately, have to give the Denver Nuggets Shabazz Muhammad. Now, I talked about Shabazz Muhammad obviously early on. He really hasn't done a whole lot in his career. Wasn't a guy that panned out. But you know what? He went really high up in this draft. He was a lottery pick. If you take him in the back half of the first round, maybe there's a lot less pressure on him. Maybe he turns out a little bit differently there for Denver at 27. Last three picks here. San Antonio at number 28. They went with Livio Jean-Charles, another guy that, quite frankly, I haven't really heard of, although Jean-Charles sounds like they were trying to find another guy from France that would end up being great. And unfortunately, they obviously didn't really hit on that, considering he never played a game in the NBA, doesn't have any stats to show for it. So didn't really pan out there for the Spurs. So let's say they are going to draft somebody that actually played in the NBA, and that's obviously going to be an upgrade. So for them, I'm going to give them Isaiah Cannon. Isaiah Cannon, solid bench player for a couple of years in the NBA. He could score it a little bit, he could pass it, but you know what? Again, another guy that just didn't really do a whole lot. But again, considering Livio Jean Charles didn't even really play in the NBA literally at all, I'm sure that they would take Isaiah Cannon at this spot all the same. Pick number 29. It goes again to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Oklahoma City Thunder picked at number 12, and they took Cody Zeller in this fake universe that we are inhabiting. In this pick, they took Archie Goodwin. Now, Archie Goodwin, had a couple of decent years coming off the bench, ended up being a below-average player when all was said and done, only played in the NBA for a couple of seasons. But you know what? For a number 29 pick, he at least got on the floor. He at least made some kind of impact. He at least went out there. But unfortunately, he's not getting drafted here because I am actually going to give the Thunder Shane Larkin. Shane Larkin, played about the same amount of time as Archie Goodwin did, but played more games, made a little bit more of an impact at a similar position. So for me, I would rather have Shane Larkin. And at number 30, we have the Phoenix Suns. So the Phoenix Suns in real life took a man named Nemanja Nedovic, a guy who only played 24 games in the NBA. Obviously, did not pan out. His stats were, let's just say, pretty terrible. So his box plus minus, as for everybody in this draft, other than a second rounder named Grant Jarrett, he had the worst defensive metrics in this entire class. So definitely did not pan out there for the Phoenix Suns. But you know what? At number 30, you don't necessarily expect everything to pan out. But in this case, at number 30, we're going to give them Archie Goodwin. Obviously, in real life, he was drafted one pick ahead by the Thunder. In this one, he falls to the Suns. Excuse me, I'm all over the place here. At number 30, and as you notice, or may have noticed, Anthony Bennett not drafted here in the first round, and there's a reason for that. He was putrid. So, Anthony Bennett not drafted in the 30 picks, although I will admit he probably would have gone 31, 32, somewhere around there if I were to keep going. Hey guys, me again. Thank you so much for watching one of my clips from the Lopes Goes Last podcast. These clips are so much fun to do. I absolutely love making them, and I absolutely love doing them. And this podcast is my baby, so I really want this thing to grow, and I really want it to succeed. So if you did like what you see, please subscribe. Also hit that bell notification so you never miss any one of my episodes or one of my clips like this one. And please do also like and share these videos with your friends and your family so that we can make this thing grow as fast as possible. And I wanted to thank you again so much. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have a great rest of your day.